just in my closing remarks, before we hear from Pastor Evans, I want to do two things. And the first thing is to tell you what an honor and a privilege it's been for me to have the opportunity to work with my colleagues and with the two courts on this summit. I want to thank you again for your participation and for your words of encouragement. And because we are in her home county, because we chose Dallas as the place to host this summit, I want to take a moment to introduce someone who truly embodies the spirit and the sentiment that we look for here today. Justice, the pursuit of justice, dedication to community, the willingness to make those difficult calls and to have those difficult conversations, and the courage to do it. And that is our newly appointed Dallas District Attorney, Faith Johnson. Would you help me welcome her? Yep. Thank you so much for being here. And now it is my great privilege to introduce Dr. Tony Evans. Though he really does not need an introduction, I have to say a few things, Dr. Evans. Dr. Evans is founder and senior pastor of Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship in Dallas. He is founder and president of the Urban Alternative, former chaplain of the NFL's Dallas Cowboys, and present chaplain of the NBA's Dallas Mavericks. Dr. Evans was the first African American to graduate with a doctoral degree from Dallas Theological Seminary, and he has written over 100 books, booklets, and Bible studies, including his legacy work, Oneness Embraced, as well as his vision work, The Kingdom Agenda. His radio broadcast, The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans, can be heard on nearly 1,000 radio outlets daily and in more than 130 countries. We are so honored to have you here today. Thank you, Dr. Evans. Please help me welcome Dr. Evans.
Again, I want to join in congratulations to you, Faith Johnson, for you have earned this appointment through your faithful service, and I'm honored to be able to be here with you today. I'm also honored to have been asked to give some closing remarks. I know it's been a long day, so we won't hold you long. I got a call from the judge in Austin. He asked me if I believed in free speech. I said yes. He said, come give one. So I'm very gratuitous for this. But just seeing the breadth of people who are here and the common passion that you share has been very encouraging to me and my colleague, Charles Wolford, who oversees all of our community outreaches in Dallas and our training across the country on many of the issues that you are addressing here today. Some years ago, I had a problem in my home. There was a crack on my plaster on my bedroom wall. We needed to get the crack fixed because it was creating disrepair and disorder and division in the plaster on my wall. So we called a painter over to rectify my problem. The painter came and he removed the old plaster, put up new plaster, repainted it. I paid him. All seemed well. But about a month later, the crack reappeared. Somewhat spiritually ticked off since I'd already paid him, I asked him to come back and please fix my problem. He then did it again. But about 45 days later, the crack reappeared, this time with its nieces, nephews, uncles, aunts, and cousins. I had acquired a family of cracks on my bedroom wall. I figured what I needed was another person, somebody who really knew what he was doing. And so I called this new gentleman over and said, would you please fix my problem? For an inordinate amount of time, he stared at the crack on my wall. And after a while, he looked at me and he said, "I am so sorry. I can't help you." I said, "You can't help me?" He said, "No." I said, "But isn't this what you do?" He said, "This is what I do, but I can't help you." I said, "Well, why can't you help me?" He said, "Because you don't have a problem with cracks on your wall." So I looked at the crack on my wall I was not having a problem with. Then I looked at the crack in front of me who was telling me I was not having a problem with cracks on my wall. And I said to him, "Now, wait a minute. I see a crack and you see a crack. Fact of the matter is, all God's children see a crack. There's a crack on my wall." Oh, he says, "There's a crack on your wall. I'm just suggesting that's not your problem." He says, "Your problem is you have a shifting foundation underneath your house. The foundation under your house is moving. And every time that shift occurs underneath the ground, all you're seeing on your wall is reflections of a much deeper issue." And so he said, "Until you solidify the foundation, you will forever be doing patchwork on the walls of your house." We are looking at a fraying society. Whether it's the legal issues, the police community issues, whether it is the breakdown in civility, you can name it, and there is a reason to have an enclave like this to discuss it. The problem occurs in the fact that the cracks just keep reappearing. A gentleman went to a doctor one day, and the doctor says, "How can I help you?" He says, "Doc, I'm hurting all over. Every part of my body is in torrid pain." He says, "Well, that's unusual." He said, "Touch your ear." And he touched his ear, and the man cringed and said, "Ah." He said, "Wow, touch your lips." He touched his lips and went, "Oh." Touch your knee, the same thing, cringing, "Ah." Every place on his body was in pain. To which the doctor said, "You idiot, you have a dislocated finger." Sometimes it feels like everything is wrong, when really, if you get the one thing right, it can solidify a bunch of other things. Let me quote a verse to you, and I know that this is not formally a religious gathering, but I want to read this verse and just share a few comments and then close. It's found in 2 Chronicles chapter 15, verses 3 to 6, and it reads this way. "In those days there was no true God and no teaching priest, and no law. There was no peace to him who went in or to him who came out. City rose up against city, and nation rose up against nation, for God troubled them with every kind of distress." Ladies and gentlemen, if God is your problem, only God is your solution. If the spiritual dimension gets lost in all of the programmatic discussions, for a while you may seem like you have patched up the wall. But given enough time, because the foundation keeps shifting, you will continue to see fraying occurring. God has established the way the world should work. We call it the kingdom agenda. That is his rule in history. He created mankind to operate a certain way in 4 distinct spheres. First of all, personal responsibility. Psalm 128 says that a person must start owning their own responsibility underneath God, self-government. Then he says that should transfer to the stability of the family, because whoever owns the family owns the future. The saga of a nation is the saga of its families written large, and the reason for these discussions up here today, to a large degree can be traced back to family breakdown and the repercussions that wind up in court. And then he goes on to say, the Lord bless you from Zion. He talks about the church, because God will not skip the church house to fix the White House. That there must be a spiritual dimension in the communities that offers well-being, not just church services, but well-being because of a value system. Let me tell you why the churches are critical. We would not have many of the problems that we have today if the churches did not replicate that which was against God. Slavery, segregation, neo-slavery, Jim Crow, and even the issue of mass incarcerations would not occur if the churches were doing what the churches should do. And that's why he says, when the clergy failed, it says the society declined. But then he goes to the society. He talks about prosperity in the city and peace in the nation, because it followed a divine order. Faith, or the absence of it, properly understood and applied, and I'm not talking about promoting a particular denomination, I'm talking about taking God seriously, affects the order in society. 9/11 shut down this country. You and I will never travel again like we used to travel before 9/11, because 19 men from halfway around the world brought the most powerful nation in history to its knees, and they did it in the name of their God. Now, if 19 men can shut down the most powerful nation in the world, what do you think people with faith applied in culture can do to bring harmony to a chaotic society? We must no longer separate the social and the spiritual. And I'm not talking about amalgamating church and state. Those institutions must be separate. But I'm saying no longer separate God, government, and good works. That when cooperating properly, it is amazing what can take place. A God consciousness stops you from doing a lot of things. I remember, since we have police officers here driving down the highway, and a police officer pulled onto the highway, and he greatly affected my driving. Just knowing he was there. Moved my right foot north and left toward my brake. I kept staring at the speedometer, and I wouldn't pass him because I was affected by his presence. 3 miles down the road, he pulled off. I went back to driving as normal because I no longer had to drive in light of his presence. A God consciousness can save you a lot of money, time, energy. And if we can work together to rebuild families or create surrogate ones, when God said he would be a mother to the motherless and a father to the fatherless, he didn't mean a floating spirit in Never Never Land. He meant he would work through people who didn't have mothers to provide mothers, and who didn't have fathers to provide fathers. That's why our primary initiative is the adoption of public schools. Our one church has adopted 54 public schools where we provide mentors and tutors and family support services, everything from pregnancy help to food and clothes and shelter. And we've gotten 370 people jobs in the last 6 months, because companies come to our campus wanting to hire because they know there will be an accountability system to anybody they hire off of our premises. So we can work together to build surrogate relationships so that jail is no longer the first option. I'll tell you a story that will relate to your discussion. And I believe the young man's name was James as well. James stole $1,500 from his employer. His employer pressed charges. James was sentenced to a couple of years in juvenile detention for stealing the money. We sent some of our men to the judge. We said, Your Honor, instead of sentencing him to juvenile, will you turn him over to the church? What we will do, if you will turn him over to us, is we will put him through a developmental character program. We will get him a part-time job. We will make sure he goes to school. We will garnish wages he stole from his part-time job to pay back the person he stole from. And we will save the county $21,000 a year that you will have to put up to keep him incarcerated. We did that in 6 months. We showed him a brand new kid who was in school doing well, who was paying back the guy he stole from. The judge called me 2 weeks later and said, will you take 20 more? What I am suggesting is that if we collaborate properly and place in the center of that collaboration the spiritual realm, and not believe because of the separation of church and state there has to be the separation of God and good works, then we can set up a model that can be emulated. That's just what we do across the country through the Urban Alternative. And we trained. When Ferguson fell, they asked me to come. We called all the churches together. We told them to adopt every school in Ferguson, to work together now for family support. So this can be replicated everywhere. Money is saved, court time is saved, and lives are transformed. Folks, we don't have a lot of time. We have a generation without consciences. We have families without stabilities. We have incarcerations that are teaching people how to be better criminals rather than better people. But if we work together, we can make the days ahead greater than the days gone by. When I was growing up, in closing, my favorite TV program as a child was Superman. I love Superman. As I sat down there next to my brother, Clark Kent was an ordinary guy in Metropolis. I mean, Perry White would often skip him. Lois Lane didn't like him that much. Jimmy Olsen would sometimes make fun of him. Oh, but don't let him find a telephone booth. When Metropolis was in trouble and the city was falling apart due to the angst and the anger and the criminal element that was taking over, his cosmic ears would hear a call. Where's Superman? Clark Kent would go to his closet or telephone booth and he'd unhook his tie and take off his glasses. I'd be sitting next to my brother and say, there he goes. He'd come out with a red and blue and white jumpsuit on. And all of a sudden, he was no longer just an ordinary man. He was faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive. He could now leap tall buildings in a single bound. In a short amount of time, he brought order to Metropolis, a city fraying because of the evil that had disseminated inside of it. How could this man do this? One simple reason. He wasn't from here. He was from a place called Krypton, long way away. But he brought the power from up there, executed it down here, so that down here got changed because he was from up there. When the spiritual gets properly connected to the social, or the political, or the legal, or the judicial, then we can have a gathering like this soon again with an S on our chest. Well, not because we're Superman or Superwoman, but because we're super people who understand the absolute centrality of connecting the social with the spiritual for the betterment of the communities we live, work, and serve. God bless you, and thank you for giving me a few moments with you.
Thank you, Pastor Evans. That concludes our day. We appreciate being reminded at the end of it where our help and hope are, and so glad that you could come and be with us this evening. Thanks to all of you for coming. We hope it was time well spent. You were invited because of your interest and leadership and your influence. You've been heard. We'll develop a report from your comments this afternoon and from the things that have been said during the day and send it to you in the days ahead. I want to thank the extraordinary panelists that we had, the testimonials this morning. My goodness, thank you. I want to thank Judge McCowan and Judge Washington, Chief Aceveda, Professor Ruklinski for being with us. Really insightful remarks. Mayor Adler and other officials who were with us, our judges who were specially invited, and for their interest in these very important issues. I want to thank the Children's Commission, Tina and Christy and Jamie and Jessica and others who were crucial in bringing all of this together, as well as our court staff, including Nina and Osler, who I introduced to you this morning. I want to thank the State Bar of Texas and the National Center for State Courts for helping fund the meeting, to the sheriff and our deputies who have been here all day watching over us, and we appreciate that, and Judge Jenkins and Paul Quinn College for hosting the event in a very wonderful space. And I want to thank my colleagues on the Supreme Court and Presiding Judge Keller and the members of the Court of Criminal Appeals for their vision and courage and support of this initiative, which I hope will be a beginning and a start of more such discussions to good end. And finally, I want to thank Justice Guzman, who ramrodded the whole thing, got us all together, told us what to do. Thanks again for being here. Have safe travels home, and Godspeed.